All right, so today we're going to talk about solving quadratic equations part 2. Yesterday we factored. Sometimes factoring, crazy as it seems, isn't always the answer because it doesn't always work. I can't magically just get to factor some stuff. So when that happens, we're going to use what's called completing the square. So when I'm completing the square, it allows me to create a perfect square, essentially. So when I do this, I'm going to start with a number on the right side of my equal sign by itself, and my x values together on the opposite. Now, if we switch swapped and had my number on the left and my x's on the right, that's fine, as long as I have number on one side, x squared, and x's on the other. So what I'm going to do first is I need to figure out what my squared number is going to be. So in order to figure out that perfect square I need to use, I'm going to take whatever my number is in front of my x. So right now my number in front of my x is my negative 10. So I'm going to take that number and I'm going to divide it in half. And I'm going to always divide it in half or divide it by 2. And that's going to give me negative 5. So if you recall with manipulating equations, I can do whatever I want to an equation as long as whatever I do to one side, I do to the other. So I am going to turn this left side into x minus 5 quantity squared. Because what I'm doing is I'm taking that x squared and I'm eventually going to take that negative 5 and square it. So I'm getting rid of my extra x's, and I'm going to have x minus 5 quantity squared. That's going to be equal to my original number that I had, so in this case 1575, plus that number, again, squared. So I'm not going to FOIL the left side, my x minus 5, because I'm still trying to just solve for this x value like I had done once we got later into our lesson yesterday. So I'm not going to actually FOIL this out, but if you did FOIL it out, you should know that when you do your L's or your last time your last, you're going to have negative 5 times negative 5, which will give you the 25, which is exactly what I wrote right here. So I'm essentially going to be adding 25 to both sides in order to make what I want to work happen. So I'm going to keep that left side the same for a second. I'm going to have my x minus 5 quantity squared. Negative 5 times negative 5. Now, you need to plug it into your calculator with the parentheses, or in your head, just take negative 5 times negative 5, which we just said was going to give me 25. So all I did between step red and step black is I actually squared that out. I'm going to keep this the same again. I'm going to go ahead and add these two values together because they are on the same side. That is a legal move. I'm going to get 1600. The whole point is doing this is I want to be able to get x by itself. So right now I have x with this quantity squared over here. Can you think of anything that allows me to undo a square? How about a square root? Yeah. So what I'm going to do next is square root both sides, because this is going to help me get that x by itself. Okay, so the square root and the square cancel out, so I'm just left with what's left in the parentheses, that x minus 5. Now this is why we ended up adding this perfect square, to hopefully get us to another perfect square. So in your calculators, turn them on. If you don't have it, go pause it, go get it. You're going to look for the square root button. So if you haven't figured that out yet, it's the x squared button. But first you have to hit that second key. Because if you notice, your second in my example is my calculator is blue. Anything written in that blue value is how you get to it by using that second key. So you're going to hit second, x to the squared, 1600, hit enter. You see you get a single solid answer of 40. But you know, because you're good, solid math students, that I could take negative 40 in parentheses and square it as well and get 1600. So I'm going to have two potential answers here. I have x minus 5 is equal to plus or minus 40. Just like yesterday, when I factored and pulled apart, I had two answers. I should have two answers today. Okay? So I'm going to split each one. I have x minus 5 is equal to 40. And I have x minus 5 is equal to negative 40. I want to solve for x, so I'm going to add 5. I get x is 45. I'm going to solve for x again, so I'm going to add 5. I get x is negative 35. And I'm done. All right, I'm going to move these a couple of these down since I write so large on my computer. Put these up since I have a lot of room to work with. So again, first steps first is let's take a look at the value in front of my x. In this case, it's negative 6. I'm going to take negative 6 divided by 2, which gives me negative 3. So then I'm going to have x minus 3 quantity squared, because it was negative 3, so I'm going to have x minus 3. If I get a positive, then I'm going to have x plus, which we will see. That's going to be equal to 391 plus negative 3 quantity squared. Okay, would you agree with me that negative 3 times negative 3 is 9? Because, again, I'm trying to save you some space. I understand you don't have a whole lot of room to work with. So I went ahead and I squared that. So in my next step, I'm going to have x minus 3 quantity squared. 391 plus 9 gives me 400. So I went ahead and added those two values together. Now I have perfect squares on both sides, so I can square root. My squared and my square root cancel, so I'm just left with x minus 3. On the right, I take the square root of 400. Which gives me plus or minus 20. I split x minus 3 equals 20. X minus 3 equals negative 20. Add 3, I get x is 23. Add 3 and I get x is negative 17. What do you notice about this next one compared to the first two examples we've done? It's got a number in front of my v squared in this case, or my variable, my squared term, right? I don't want numbers in front of it. So I'm going to ask myself, can I divide every single term by that number? In this case, can I take everything divided by 2? Yes, I can, so we're going to do it first. So first step, divide by 2. So 2 divided by 2 gives me 1. 16 divided by 2 gives me 8. And 1768 divided by 2 gives me 884. From here, I'm going to take the number in front of my single variable, or in this case v, which is negative 8. So I'm going to take negative 8 divided by 2. It gives me negative 4. So I have v minus 4 quantity squared is equal to 884 plus negative 4 quantity squared. Go away. Negative 4 quantity squared gives me 16. So I'm going to take 884 and plus 16, which gives me 900. So v minus 4 quantity squared is equal to 900. I'm going to square root both sides. I get v minus 4 is equal to plus or minus 30. I have v minus 4 equals 30. V minus 4 equals negative 30. Add 4. V is 34. Add 4 more, and v is negative 26. Now you're probably saying, Miss Kimmy, why can't we just do this all the time? Because this might be a little bit easier than factoring for you. Well, when I can factor, it's best to factor because factoring is one of those basic things that isn't going to go away. Now, we're going to see more cases where we can factor later on in our math career compared to when we can complete the square. Completing the square is good to know. It's just the one that's not used as often. You will see more examples of when we can factor and then when we can do what we learned tomorrow, which is the quadratic formula. But we can complete some problems this way, so it's good to know all possible ways. Come back. I've got multiple purple dots on there. Sorry about that, guys. Okay, so I asked myself, is y squared by itself any numbers in front of it? Nope. Okay, so take my value of negative 8 and divide that by 2. I get negative 4. So I have y minus 4 quantity squared is equal to 20 plus negative 4 squared. We just said negative 4 squared was 16. So I have 20 plus 16, which gives me 36. Now I'm doing this all backwards. So now I have y minus 4 quantity squared equals 36. I go ahead and take the square root of both sides. I get y minus 4 is equal to plus or minus 6. Y minus 4 is 6, and y minus 4 is negative 6. I add 4, and I get y is equal to 10. I add 4, and I get y is equal to negative 2. That's my two different answers. All right, this is a good example. I like this problem. The reason being is, what's my middle term? Is it positive or negative? It's positive, so we can finally see a positive example of it. Haha, pun pun. So I'm going to go ahead and take 14 divided by 2, and I get 7. Alrighty here. Let's make that actually look like a number and not some weird symbol. So I have x plus 7 quantity squared, and it's plus because my 7 was positive up above. We've been subtracting this whole time because we got negative numbers. That is going to be equal to 374 plus 7 squared. 7 squared gives me 49. So I'm going to take 374 plus 49. So I have x, okay, thought I switched colors there, but I guess not. So I have x squared plus 7 is equal to 393. I'm going to go ahead and take the square root of both sides. I get x plus 7 is equal to plus or minus 393 is not a perfect number. Usually, when we get to this part and we get a non-perfect number, we stop and we say, hey, let's break this down into groups. However, I want to get some answers. So today, we are going to put it into a decimal. We are going to use 2 decimal places. So we should get 19. Ooh, 19, not 18. Should get 19.82. Make sure you round correctly. Hint, hint. There are going to be ones like this on your homework. Give me a second and I'll tell you how many there are. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Excuse me, 1, 2, 3, 4. You have 4 problems. I was counting answers. You have 4 problems that are going to end up like this. So half of your homework. So when you get to this part, please make sure you just go ahead and take the square roots. You can leave it as a decimal. Make sure you round correctly. Alright, now that my little rounding spiel is said, let's go ahead and split my problem. I have x plus 7 is equal to 19.82, and x plus 7 is equal to negative 19.82. I subtract my 7, and I get x is equal to 12.82. I subtract my 7, and I get x is equal to negative 26. Sorry, my finger is not making contact there. I get negative 26.82. Okay, so the difference between today's stuff and yesterday's. Yesterday's is all of my stuff was on the same side together, or instead equal to 0, or there wasn't even any equal to 0 part. So when I'm asking, hey, what about when should I choose to factor versus when should I choose to complete the square? Completing the square will have the number on the other side already for you, so that all you have to do is you know when to solve for by completing the square. Factoring and using the quadratic formula, which is what we'll learn tomorrow, is going to be the trickier of the two to the side. So if you're seeing something like this, your first bet is to try and factor it. If you're seeing something like this, you're going to go ahead and complete the square.